I've told this story maybe 100 times now. To new recruits, to my kids, once to a drunk trade captain who didn't believe a word of it. And every single time I get to the same part and my throat closes up like somebody's got a hand around it. So bear with me. I was there. I saw it. I had his blood on my sleeves for 2 days because I refused to change my jacket and nobody made me. His name was Halloran, Sergeant Theo Halloran, we just called him Hal. And this is the day he took 5 blades meant for a queen who wasn't even ours. Let me set it up for you, because if you don't understand where we were, you won't understand why it mattered. There's a place out past the Marin Belt called the Lattice of Sonn. It's not a planet, it's a station, but station is a poor word for it. Imagine a ring the size of a small moon, spun out of pale stone and old metal, hanging in the dark with nothing under it. No sun close enough to warm it. It makes its own light, this soft silver glow that comes up out of the walls themselves, so there are no shadows on the lattice. None. Everything is evenly lit always, like the place doesn't want anybody hiding anything. They built it thousands of years ago as a neutral ground, a place where enemies could meet and not kill each other. There are laws written into the stone there, literal laws, carved so deep you could lose your whole arm in the grooves, and the first law is the one everybody knows. No weapon may be drawn beneath the silver. Break it and the lattice itself is supposed to end you. I never found out if that part was true. I hope I never do. Now the people we were guarding. The Sethari. Tall folks, taller than any human by a head and a half, thin like they were poured instead of grown, with skin that had this faint shine to it like the inside of a shell. Their blood ran silver, which I only know because I ended up wearing some of it. When they spoke, it was low and slow, and it did something to the back of your neck, not unpleasant, just aware, like standing near a big engine you can't see. But here's the thing about the Sethari. They weren't one people, not anymore. Long time back, before any of us were born, they'd split. 2 courts, the Amber Court and the Ashen Court. And here's the part that always got me. The 2 courts were ruled by sisters, twins. Queen Asen of the Amber, Queen Ravella of the Ashen. Born the same hour from the same mother, and they hadn't spoken a word to each other in 30 years. Nobody could tell me exactly what started it. That's how these things go, right? You ask 10 people, you get 10 reasons, and none of them are the real one because the real one is buried under 30 years of dead soldiers. What I knew was this. The 2 courts had been bleeding each other slowly for 3 decades. Border stations, trade lanes, ugly little wars in ugly little places nobody important ever saw. And now, finally, somehow, both queens had agreed to come to the Lattice of Sonn, to talk, maybe to end it. That's where we came in, the humans. I should explain why they wanted us there, because it's the strangest part and it's true. Neither court trusted the other's guards, obviously, and they didn't trust their own neutral choices either. Every species out here has old debts, old grudges, somebody's cousin who did somebody wrong. But humans, we were new out here, barely 50 years off our own rock, still figuring out which end of the galaxy was up. Nobody had a grudge against us yet because we hadn't been around long enough to earn one. To the Sethari, we were this odd little species, short, loud, breakable, with these blunt faces they couldn't read. Half of them thought we were a joke. But we had 2 things going for us. One, we didn't take sides, because we were too small to have a side. 2, and I heard this from a Sethari officer myself, said it to my face, we did a thing they'd never seen a species do. We put ourselves between danger and people who weren't even ours, on purpose, for no reason that made sense to them. They had a word for it, I can't pronounce it right. Closest I can get is Vethka. It means, roughly, the ones who stand in front. They didn't mean it as a compliment at first. They meant it like you'd talk about a strange animal. By the end of that day, they meant it different. So there we were. 40 humans standing honor guard at the biggest peace summit in 30 years, between two queens who wanted each other dead, in a place where drawing a weapon was supposed to get you killed by the walls. What could go wrong? The morning of it, and I say morning, though there's no morning on the Lattice, just the shift they called it, the great hall was fuller than I'd ever seen it. Picture it, a room so big you could park a warship in it, the ceiling lost up in that silver haze so you couldn't tell where the walls ended. On one side, the amber court, all in warm colors, deep golds and burnt oranges, their banners so long they pooled on the floor like spilled honey. On the other side, the ashen court, in grays and dusk blues and this dark charcoal that ate the light. Two colors of the same people, standing as far apart as the room would let them. And the smell, I remember the smell. The Sethari burned something in their braziers, some resin, and it filled the hall with this scent that was half incense, half cold rain. It got into your clothes. I smelled it for a week after. The sound was the strangest part. All those people, thousands of them, and almost no noise. The Sethari don't murmur. They wait. So the hall was this vast, breathing quiet, just the hiss of the braziers and the shuffle of our own human boots, which suddenly sounded very loud and very clumsy. Hal was posted near the center, near the dais. I was off to his left, maybe 20 feet at the edge of a low set of steps. My job was medical. I wasn't even supposed to have a weapon really. I had a sidearm like everybody, but I was there to patch people up, not shoot them. Truth is, I figured I'd spend the day bored, watching two queens make speeches I couldn't understand. I keep coming back to Hal that morning because of something small. He wasn't nervous. I was nervous. Half of us were, standing in that huge hall full of aliens who could look down at the tops of our heads, but Hal had this stillness. He was maybe 40, gray coming in at his temples, a face like an old fence post, and he stood there like he'd stood in 100 rooms like this and would stand in 100 more. He caught me fidgeting and he gave me this look, just a flick of the eyes. Settle down. Then, real quiet without moving his mouth much, he said, "First rule, kid, watch hands." Hands. Everybody watches faces. Faces lie, hands don't. He said it like it was nothing. Like he was telling me the weather. I've watched hands ever since. Every room I walk into, 30 years later, I watch the hands first. That man rewired me with 6 words and he'll never know it. The queens came in. I want to describe them right, so listen. Queen Asen of the Amber Court came from the gold side. She was tall even for a Sethari, and where the others shimmered pale she had this warmth to her skin, faint bronze, like she'd been standing near a fire her whole life. She wore no crown. I found that strange. Just a circlet of dark metal, thin as wire. She didn't need more. When she walked, the whole gold half of the hall bent toward her like grass in wind. And from the gray side came Queen Ravella of the Ashen Court. And here's where it got into my chest, because they were the same face. I knew they were twins, everybody knew, but knowing it and seeing it are two different animals. Ravella was Asen exactly, down to the line of her jaw, except everything warm in Asen was cool in her. Same face, 30 years of a different life carved into it. Where Asen was bronze, Ravella was pale as station light. Where Asen moved soft, Ravella moved like she was braced for a blow. They walked out onto that dais from opposite ends. They stopped maybe 40 feet apart, and they looked at each other. The whole hall, thousands of people, went so quiet I heard my own heartbeat. 30 years. 30 years, and here were these two women, born the same hour, looking at each other across a stone floor in a room where the walls kill anyone who reaches for a knife. Neither of them moved, neither of them spoke. And I remember thinking, I was young and stupid, I remember thinking, this is going to work. Look at them. They don't want this war. Anybody can see it. I was half right. And half right is the worst thing to be, because it means you didn't see the other half coming. Now here's where I have to slow down, because this is the part I've gone over in my head 10,000 times, trying to find the moment I could have done something. There was a third group in that hall. I hadn't thought much about them. The lattice has keepers, neutral ones. Not Sethari, a species called the On, small hunched folk in long robes who tended the place, kept the braziers lit, kept the old laws. They'd been there longer than anybody. They were furniture, basically. You stopped seeing them after an hour, the way you stop seeing a clock on the wall. Which is exactly the point. Somebody had counted on that. The speeches started. An old Sethari read out the terms of the meeting in that slow, low voice, and I didn't understand most of it, and I'll be honest, my attention drifted. I was watching the queens. Everybody was. Except Hal. I looked over at some point, and Hal wasn't watching the dais at all. He turned, just slightly, and he was watching the keepers. The little robed on, moving between the braziers with their long poles, refilling the resin. I remember thinking it was odd, and then I remember thinking, watch hands, and I looked at the keeper's hands. And one of them was wrong. I couldn't have told you why at first. They all had the poles. They all moved the same shuffling way. But one of them, one near the dais, close to where the two queens stood, was holding the pole too high, gripping it wrong, like it wasn't a tool to him, like it was a habit from something else. Like it was a spear. My mouth went dry. I started to move toward Hal to say something, anything, and that's when it all came apart. It happened fast. I want to say it happened slow because that's how memory does it, stretches the worst seconds out into hours. But it was fast. Real time, it was maybe 6 seconds start to finish. I've timed it in my head. 6 seconds. The keeper near the dais dropped the pole. And under his robe he had blades. Not one, not two. He came up out of that hunch like a spring uncoiling, robe falling open, and there were blades strapped all down his arms, short and curved and dull black so they wouldn't catch the light. Ceramic, we found out later. No metal. That's how he got them past every scanner on the lattice. Metal would have screamed. This didn't make a sound. And he went for the queens. Not one queen. Both. That's the thing nobody understood in the moment. He wasn't amber or ashen. He went straight up the middle of that dais between the two sisters, blades out, and I understood in one sick flash what it was. It wasn't an assassination. It was a massacre meant to look like one court killing the other. Kill both queens in the same breath, in a neutral hall, and let each side blame the other. 30 years of Cold War goes hot in an afternoon. Somebody wanted that. Somebody wanted these two women dead, and their peoples at each other's throats forever. The hall erupted. Guards on both sides surged forward, but they were 40 feet back, all of them, kept at a distance by the old laws, and the keeper was already there, already between the sisters, already swinging. Everybody was too far. Everybody except one man. Hal was moving before the robe hit the floor. I've thought about this so much. He was closer than the court guards, yes, but he still shouldn't have made it. The distance was wrong. The math was wrong. He was a 40-year-old human in a hall full of people built twice his size, and he crossed that floor like something had reached into him and pulled. He got there just as the keeper reached the queens. And he didn't shoot. He couldn't shoot, first rule of the lattice, no weapon drawn beneath the silver, and I swear to you, even in that second, I don't think it was the rule that stopped him. There wasn't time. His sidearm was on his hip, and the blades were already coming, and there was a body he could put in the way faster than he could draw. So he put his body in the way. He hit the keeper from the side, wrapped him up, and turned so that his own back was to the blades and his arms were around both queens, shoving them apart out of the line, one to each side. And the keeper's arms came down. I heard it, that's the part I can't unhear. In all that noise, all that screaming, I heard the sound the blades made going in. 5 times. I counted later from the wounds, but I swear I heard each one in the moment. That wet, awful, final sound. 5 blades. In his back, his side, his shoulder, high near the neck. For 2 queens who weren't his. for a peace that wasn't his war, for people who, that morning, had thought he was a strange little animal that stood in front of things for no reason anybody could understand. The keeper's sixth strike never landed. Hal, with 5 blades in him, still had his arms locked around that killer, and he held on, just held on, long enough. The court guards were on the keeper a half-second later, a wall of gold and gray bodies slamming down together. Amber and Ashen fighting side by side for the first time in 30 years, and none of them even noticed, because they were all reaching for the same enemy. Hal went down. I was already running. I got to him, and there was so much blood I couldn't tell where he ended and the floor began. Human blood, red, spreading out under him, and mixed in with it, silver, the Queen's blood too, from where the blades had caught them, small cuts, nothing, because he'd taken the rest. He'd taken all the rest. I've done a lot of field medicine since. I was young then, and I froze for exactly 1 second, and Hal, with 5 blades in him, gray-faced, drowning. Hal looked up at me and said, "Watch hands." I laughed. God help me, I laughed, this horrible cracked sound, because he was dying and he was still teaching me. Then I stopped laughing and I worked. I'll spare you most of it. It's not pretty and it's not the point. What matters is I kept him breathing. I got pressure on the worst of them. I was screaming for a stretcher, for a medbay, for anybody, and the whole hall was chaos around me. And then something happened that made all of it go silent. A shadow fell over us, 2 shadows. I looked up. The queens were kneeling, both of them in the blood. In their court colors, gold and gray, kneeling in a dead man's blood, except he wasn't dead, not yet. And I think it was them kneeling that made me swear to whatever's out there that I would not let him be. Queen Asen had her hands over one of the wounds, pressing, her silver-cut fingers slick with his red. Queen Ravella had lifted his head into her lap so he wouldn't choke. 2 queens who hadn't touched each other in 30 years, kneeling on either side of a human who'd bled for them both. And Ravella, the cold one, the braced one, Ravella looked across his body at her sister, for the first time, really looked, and I watched 30 years crack down the middle in her face. "Save him," Asen said to me. Her voice wasn't a queen's voice anymore. It was just a person's. "Whatever it costs, save him." I said, "I'm trying, ma'am," which is a stupid thing to say to a queen, but it's what came out. Then they took him from me. Their own healers, Amber and Ashen both, working together over a human on a floating litter, and I ran alongside with my hand still pressed to his side, and the last thing I saw of that hall was the keeper being dragged away, and 40 humans standing in a ring around the empty dais, watching us go, none of them moving, all of them with their hands loose and ready. Watching hands, every one of them. They took him deep into the station, into a healing hall the Sethari kept, a room I wasn't cleared for, and nobody said one word about clearance. I just walked in and no one stopped me. I stood in the corner with his blood drying on my sleeves, and I watched aliens fight to keep a human alive. It went on for a long time. I don't know how long. There's no day on the lattice, remember. Just the silver light that never changes, so time turns to soup. I sat on the floor eventually because my legs gave out. Somebody, one of the gray-robed Ashen healers, brought me water without being asked. I never forgot that either. All the little kindnesses of that place come back to me at strange hours. At some point I fell asleep sitting up. I woke because the room had gone quiet in a different way. Not empty quiet, waiting quiet. And I looked up, and Hal's eyes were open. Here's the part I built this whole story toward. Here's the part where my throat closes up. He'd been under for 2 days. 2 full days, though he didn't know that. 5 blades, and by every rule of medicine I've ever learned he should not have opened his eyes again. But he did. Slow, confused, a man surfacing from very deep water. And the first thing he saw, the first thing in the whole galaxy that Sergeant Theo Halloran saw when he came back from wherever he'd been, was 2 queens at his bedside. Asen of the Amber on his right, Ravella of the Ashen on his left. Neither had left. In 2 days, I learned later, neither of them had left that room for more than an hour. Their courts had run themselves. Their advisors had come and gone in a panic, and the two queens had sat on either side of a human's bed and waited. Together, Hal blinked at them. His voice when it came was a wreck, barely there. And he looked from one to the other, at these two identical faces, gold and gray, both leaning over him, and he said, "Am I seeing double, or is there two of you?" And Queen Ravella, the cold sister, the one who'd braced for a blow her whole life, Queen Ravella laughed. I'd bet my life she hadn't laughed in 30 years. It came out of her cracked and rusty and surprised, like she'd forgotten she owned the sound. And her sister looked at her when she did it, looked at her laughing, and something passed between them that had nothing to do with me or Hal or anybody. Something only the two of them would ever understand. Asen said, gentle, "There are two of us. There have always been two of us. We had forgotten how to sit in the same room." Hal took that in, slow. You could see him working through the fog. Then, because he was Hal, he asked the only question that mattered to him. "Did I get him, the keeper, did I?" "You got him," I said from my corner before either queen could. My voice came out rough. "You got him, Hal. Both of them are alive. You did it." He shut his eyes just for a second, and I watched 40 years of stillness in that man finally let go of something. His shoulders came down half an inch, that's all, but I saw it. "Good," he said. "Okay, good. I'll tell you what came out of it, because you're going to want to know, and because it's the reason any of this matters beyond one brave man and a bad day." The keeper talked. Under Sethari questioning, which I know nothing about and don't want to, he gave up who'd sent him. It wasn't the Amber Court. It wasn't the Ashen. It was a third party, an old warlord family that had grown fat on 30 years of the Sisters' War, selling ships and blades to both sides, getting rich off the bleeding. Peace would have ruined them. So they'd bought a killer, dressed him as furniture, and tried to murder two queens in a way that would keep the war burning forever. And it would have worked. That's the part that keeps me up. It would have worked perfectly. Both queens dead, each court blaming the other, 30 years of grief with a match dropped into it. It would have worked, except a strange little species nobody respected had sent one strange little man who stood in front of things for no reason the Sethari could understand. The two courts signed their peace 11 days later, in the same hall, on the same dais. And they made Hal stand between them when they signed it. He wasn't healed. He could barely stand. He had to lean on a rail, but they put him in the center between the two thrones, because both queens refused to sit on either side of the other unless he was between them. The man who stood in front, standing between them one more time, on purpose, the way he always did. I was there for that too. 40 humans in the front row this time, not the back. And when the queens signed, the whole hall, gold and gray both, made a sound I'd never heard the Sethari make. A low, long, humming note, all of them together, thousands of voices. Their word for honor hummed instead of spoken. It went on for a full minute. It came up through the floor, through the stone, through the old carved laws. Hal stood there and took it the way he took everything, still, quiet, like it was somebody else they were singing for. Afterward I asked him, I said, "Hal, 5 blades. You had maybe half a second to decide. Why'd you do it? They weren't ours, any of it. Why?" And he looked at me with that old fence post face, and he shrugged the shoulder that still worked, and he said, "Somebody had to stand in front. Might as well be me. That's the whole thing. That's what happened at the Lattice of Sonn." He lived, by the way, in case you were worried. Hal lived. He walked with a limp the rest of his days, and he complained about the cold like an old man because of the shoulder, and he taught 2,000 recruits to watch hands instead of faces, and every one of them is out there right now watching hands because of him. He never once told this story himself. Not once. Said it wasn't his to tell. Said the story was about two sisters who found their way back to the same room, and he was just the door they walked through. I've thought about that a lot. I've decided he was wrong. I've decided the door matters. Because there's always going to be a killer dressed as furniture in some room somewhere, waiting for everyone to look away. And most of the time, everyone does. But sometimes there's one person watching the hands. Sometimes that's enough. So if you ever find yourself in a room full of people who look right past you, a room where you're the small one, the strange one, the one they think is a joke, I want you to remember Sergeant Theo Halloran, 5 blades in his back, arms wrapped around 2 queens who weren't his, holding on just long enough. And I want you to watch the hands. You never know which room is going to be the one. I lied to you. Not on purpose, but I did. When I told you the first part, I got to the end and I said the 2 courts signed their peace 11 days later, nice and clean, the whole hall humming, Hal standing in the middle. And that's all true. Every word of it happened exactly like I said. But I made it sound like those 11 days were just Hal healing up in a warm bed with 2 queens taking turns holding his water cup. I made it sound like the hard part was over the second he opened his eyes. It wasn't. The hard part was those 11 days. And I skipped them because, I'll be honest with you, I skipped them because we lost someone in there. And for a long time I couldn't say his name out loud without my chest going wrong. But I'm old now, and a story you only tell the pretty half of isn't a story, it's an advertisement. So let me back up. Let me tell you what really happened between the blades and the signing. Let me tell you about the 11 days. Start here. The man who took the 5 blades didn't get out of that healing hall for a week. Everybody thinks stab wounds are simple. You either die or you don't, and if you don't, you get up. It doesn't work like that. 5 deep punctures, ceramic blades, and ceramic is worse than metal in some ways. It chips, it leaves grit in the wound, it doesn't come out clean. Hal was awake, yes, but awake and healed are different countries, and there's a long, ugly road between them. So for those first days he was flat on his back in that silver-lit room, and I basically lived on the floor beside his cot. The Sethari healers were good, better than good. They did things I still can't explain, closed wounds with light somehow, but they didn't know human bodies. They knew Sethari. So they kept me there as their translator, their reference. I'd say no, human hearts sit here, not there. And no, that dose would kill him, cut it by 3/4, and they'd listen. They always listened. That was the thing about the Sethari once they decided you mattered. They stopped seeing the size of you. And the queens came. Both of them. Not together at first, that's important, but in shifts, almost like they'd worked out a schedule so they wouldn't have to be in the room at the same time. Asen in the morning shift. Ravella in the dark shift. Passing each other in the doorway with their eyes down. 30 years doesn't undo itself because a man bled on the floor. I understood that then. It undoes itself slower. Grudgingly, one doorway at a time. The trouble started on the 3rd day. I remember because it was the first day Hal could sit up on his own, and he was in a foul mood about being weak, snapping at the healers, and I was glad of it because a man well enough to be angry is a man who's going to live. An advisor came in. Ashen court, gray robes, one of Ravella's people, tall even for a Sethari, thin as a reed with a voice like dry paper. His name was Vashka. I'll never forget it because of what came after. He came to thank Hal. That's what he said. He came in slow and respectful, and he made a little bow, a Sethari bow, this thing where they fold at the neck, and he thanked the human for saving his queen's life. And Hal, propped up on his pillows, gray in the face, said, "You're welcome." And then he watched the advisor's hands the whole time he was in the room. I saw him do it. Old habit, watch hands. When Vashka left, Hal was quiet for a while. Then he said to me, "Lo, that one's scared." "Everybody's scared," I said. "Somebody just tried to gut 2 queens." "No," Hal shook his head, slow, careful because of the wounds. Not scared like that, scared like a man who did a thing and knows it's coming back on him. His hands. He closed his eyes. His hands wouldn't stay still. I didn't want to hear it. God, I didn't want to hear it. We'd caught the killer. It was over. I wanted it to be over. You're seeing things, Hal, I said. You're full of painkillers. Get some rest. He looked at me. That old fence post look, and he said, Kid, when have I ever been wrong about hands? He hadn't, not once, and that scared me more than anything. Here's what we didn't know yet, what came out slow over the next days. The keeper, the killer, the one dressed as furniture, he hadn't gotten onto the lattice alone. You can't. The on-keepers who tend that place, they've been vetted for generations, background checked back to their grandparents. You don't just walk a stranger in wearing their robes. Somebody on the inside had put him there. Somebody with clearance. Somebody trusted. Somebody who could sign a name and get a false keeper past every check the lattice had. And it wasn't Amber. And it wasn't Ashen, not the queens, not the courts as a whole. It was one man. One frightened, greedy man who'd taken money from the warlord house, the Dravik, they were called, the old arms family that had grown rich off 30 years of the Sisters' War. The Dravik had bought themselves a door into the lattice, and the door had a name. I think you already know the name. Vashka. Ravella's own advisor, the reed-thin man who came to thank Hal with hands that wouldn't stay still. But we didn't have proof yet. That's the thing. Hal had a feeling and I had a bad stomach, and neither of those things convict a queen's trusted advisor. If we accused him and we were wrong, the Ashen Court would take it as an insult from the humans, from the Vethka, the strange little animals who stood in front of things, and the whole piece would come apart before it was even signed. So we couldn't move loud. We had to move quiet. And Hal couldn't move at all. He was still flat on his back most hours. So it fell to me, a field medic who'd never done a day of intelligence work in his life, watching an advisor's hands across a healing hall. Hal coached me from his cot, that whole week, whispering in the dark shift when Ravella wasn't there, teaching me things I didn't know a man could teach. When he talks to the queen, watch where his feet point where a man wants to be. When someone brings food in, watch who he watches. A guilty man always checks if the poison's being served. Count how many times he touches his own face. Liars touch their faces. It's the body trying to hide the mouth. I sat in that corner for 3 days pretending to nap, and I watched Vashka every time he came in. And slowly, piece by piece, the picture came together and it was ugly. His feet never pointed at his queen. He flinched at the healer's trays. And when Ravella wasn't looking, his face, that dry paper face, went somewhere cold and calculating and afraid. Hal was right. Hal was always right about hands. But knowing a thing and proving it are two more different countries. Now I have to tell you about the young one. Because the young one is where it gets hard, and if I skip him again, I'll have lied to you twice. There was a Sethari boy. Not a boy, they don't have boys quite like we do, but young, barely into his court service, an Ashen guard named Teth, assigned to the healing hall detail. He was the one who'd brought me water that first night without being asked. Remember I told you about that, the little kindness I never forgot. That was Teth. He was curious about humans the way the young ones were before the old grudges hardened in them. He'd sit near me on the dark shift and ask me questions in halting trade tongue. What did we eat? Why were we so short? Was it true we couldn't see in the dark? He thought Hal was the greatest thing he'd ever seen, this small broken human who'd wrapped his arms around both queens. Teth used to look at Hal like some people look at a saint. And I made a mistake, I'll own it. I made the mistake, and I've carried it 30 years. I told Teth what we suspected. Not everything, but enough. I told him to watch Vashka. I thought I was being smart. I thought here's a young Ashen guard, trusted inside he can watch the advisor from angles I can't. I gave him Hal's lessons secondhand. Watch the hands, watch the feet, Watch who he watches. I turned a curious kid into a spy, and I didn't think twice about it. He was so proud to help. That's what kills me. He was so proud that the humans trusted him with something. It went wrong on the 9th day. Teth found something. He came to me in the dark shift, and his hands were shaking. I should have seen it. I'd been taught to see it, and I missed it in the one person it mattered most. He told me Vashka had met someone. In the lower levels near the old cargo locks, where the lattice's silver light goes dim and thin. Vashka had met a stranger down there, and money had changed hands, and words Teth couldn't fully hear. But one word he caught clear. The signing, they'd said the signing. The Dravik weren't done. The keeper had failed, so they'd go again at the signing itself, 11 days out, when both queens would stand on that dais together to make the peace real. One more try, and this time with Vashka on the inside to open the door. Teth told me all this in a rush, whispering, terrified and thrilled at once, and I told him, good, you did good, now stay away from Vashka, don't let him see you, we'll take it from here. And Teth nodded, and he went back to his post. And Vashka had already seen him. They found Teth the next shift in one of the dim lower corridors. I won't tell you how. It was made to look like an accident, a fall, and it almost worked, except I'd taught him to watch hands, and I knew this boy's hands, and there were marks on them that don't come from falling. I sat with his body for a long time before they took it, same as I'd sat with Hal's blood. I have a habit of sitting with the ones I couldn't save. It doesn't help anything. I do it anyway. And then I did the thing I'm least proud of, and most proud of in the same breath. I didn't go quiet. I didn't move careful anymore. I went to Hal. He was sitting up by then, nearly whole or as whole as he'd ever be again. And I told him about Teth, and I watched a thing happen in that man's face that I'd never seen before and never saw again. Hal didn't get angry the way people get angry, loud and hot. He got still, stiller than still. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. He said, very quiet, that was my lesson that got him watching. My hands, my feet, my rules. I put those in that boy's head through you. No, I said, it was me. I told him it's on me. It's on the man who did it, Hal said. Everything else is just us deciding what we do about it. He swung his legs off the cot, first time in 9 days. The healers rushed over and he waved them off with a look. Get me up, he said to me, and get me the queens, both of them, same room, now. Hal, they haven't been in the same room since. Then it's time, he said. Peace can't be built by 2 people who won't stand in one room, and a boy just died so it could get built. So they're going to stand in one room, and they're going to hear this together from a man who took 5 blades so they'd have the chance. I don't know how I got both queens into that healing hall at the same time. I think I just said Hal was asking, and that was enough. He was owed anything he wanted, and everyone knew it. Asen came from the gold side, Ravella from the gray. They stepped into that room from opposite doors, exactly like they'd stepped onto the dais 11 days before, and they stopped, and they looked at each other across a wounded man's cot with all the old cold in the air between them. And Hal, pale, leaning on me because he couldn't quite stand alone, a man who by every rule should still have been flat on his back. Hal looked at both of them and told them everything. Vashka, the Dravik, the money in the dim corridor, the plan for the signing, and Teth, the boy. He told them about Teth last, and he told it plain, no softening. A young ashen guard, one of Ravella's own, killed for watching too well. I watched Ravella's face while he said it. This was her advisor, her court, her responsibility, and this was her guard who died. She stood there and took it like she'd taken things her whole life, braced, waiting for the blow. But this blow landed different because it came from inside her, from her own house, from a man she'd trusted. When Hal finished, the room was so quiet I could hear the braziers hiss. And then Ravella did something I'll remember till I die. She turned to her sister, to Asen. the one she hadn't spoken to in 30 years except across a dying man. And in a voice that shook, the cold sister, the braced one, her voice actually shook, she said, "The rot is in my house, not yours, mine. I have spent 30 years believing you sent the killers in the night, and all along," she stopped. Her jaw worked. "All along I never once looked behind me, at my own." And Asen, I braced for her to be cold back, to score the point. 30 years is 30 years. Asen crossed the room. She crossed the whole room, gold robes and all, and she took her sister's hands. The silver-cut hands, the ones that hadn't touched hers since before I was born. "We were both looking the wrong way," Asen said. "That was the whole plan. That was always the whole plan. They made us look at each other so neither of us would look at them." Two queens, holding hands in a silver room, over the cot of a human who'd bled for both of them. And Hal, leaning on me half dead, said the only thing worth saying. "Then let's make them wish you'd never looked away." Here's how it ended. The real ending, not the pretty one I gave you before. They didn't arrest Vashka, that's what I expected. I expected guards, a cell, a trial. But the queens were smarter than me, smarter than the Dravik, and they'd learned the lesson the hard way: you don't move loud when you can move quiet. They let Vashka think he'd won. They let him believe Teth's death had scared everyone silent, that his plan for the signing was still alive. And they built a trap inside it. The signing went ahead, on schedule, in the great hall, both queens on the dais, and Vashka, standing in his trusted place at Ravella's side, waited for the Dravik's second killer to make his move. The killer was there, dressed as an honor guest this time, Dravik money buying him a seat. And when he reached for the blade under his coat, he didn't get it half out. Because this time we were ready. 40 humans, spread through that hall, every one of them trained in 11 days by a man on a cot to watch hands instead of faces. We'd made the whole human guard into Hal. And a human named Okonkwo, standing near the guest seats, saw the hand move before the blade even cleared the coat, and she had him on the ground with his arm locked before anyone else in that hall had so much as turned their head. No weapon drawn, not one. First rule of the lattice kept perfectly. Just a human hand closing on an assassin's wrist, quiet as anything beneath the silver. And Vashka, watching his second killer fail, understood in one terrible second that the trap wasn't around the queens. The trap was around him. Ravella turned to her advisor, her own advisor at her own side on the dais in front of both courts and thousands of witnesses, and she didn't shout, she didn't weep. She just looked at him with a queen's whole cold weight, and she said, loud enough for the stone to carry it, "You forgot rule one of this place, Vashka. No weapon may be drawn beneath the silver." A pause. "So I never drew one, I let you draw yours." And she named his crimes, all of them, the keeper, the Dravik money, and Teth she named the boy in front of everyone, made his death a matter of record so it could never be quietly filed away as a fall. The two courts took Vashka together, gold and gray hands on the same man for the same reason. Same as they'd taken the first killer 11 days before, except this time nobody was surprised to see them working side by side. This time it was just how things were now. Then they signed. That's the part I told you before. The humming, the floor singing, Hal in the middle because neither queen would sit without him between them. I just left out that a boy had to die to buy it, and that I had a hand in it. I told Hal after, when it was all done and the courts had gone and the lattice was quiet again. I told him I couldn't get past Teth, that I'd turned a kind kid into a spy and gotten him killed, and I didn't know how to carry it. And Hal, recovering, gray at the temples, 5 scars in his back that would ache in the cold for the rest of his life. Hal didn't tell me it wasn't my fault. That's what I expected. That's what people say. He didn't say it. He said, "It is partly yours, and it's partly mine. We're going to carry that, both of us. You don't get to put it down and you don't get to let it crush you either. You carry it and you let it make you careful so the next kid who trusts you lives." He looked at me a long moment. That's the whole job, kid, standing in front. Sometimes you're not fast enough. You carry the ones you miss and you keep standing in front anyway. Otherwise their dying was for nothing. I've carried Teth 30 years, just like Hal said. He was right about that too. He was right about most things. There's a stone on the Lattice of Sonn now. Down in the lower levels, in a corridor they've made bright, they changed the light there. The on did, so it's not dim anymore, so no one ever dies in the dark there again. And on the stone there's a name in 3 languages. Ashen, Amber, and because the humans asked, ours. Teth, he watched too well. Both queens put that there, together. Ravella chose the words. And every year, on the day the peace was signed, they meet at that stone. Both of them. The Amber Queen and the Ashen Queen, who once didn't speak for 30 years. They stand at a young guard's stone in the bright corridor, and they don't say much, and then they go and rule their peace for another year. I've been back to see it. I stood at that stone with an old limping human beside me, the two of us, saying nothing, because what is there to say? Hal put his hand on the stone, just for a second. Then he said the last thing I'll leave you with, and then I'll let you go. He said, everybody remembers the one who took the blades. Nobody remembers the one who watched too well. But it's the watchers that save you, kid. It's always the watchers. The ones nobody sees, seeing everything. Then he took his hand off the stone, and he straightened up as best his back would let him. And he stood in front of me the way he always stood in front of everything. So watch the hands, he said, and be worth the ones who watched for you.